Media headlines in India this week have been dominated by the standoff between Indian and Chinese troops in a remote border area of the Union Territory of Ladakh. So what is this standoff all about? On Simply Nitin this week, I'm going to talk about the India-China boundary dispute, which dates back to 1960s and of course stretches all along the 4,000 odd kilometers stretching from Arunachal Pradesh in the east, running through Sikkim, Uttarakhand, and then coming and ending up near Jammu and Kashmir, now of course the Union Territory of Ladakh. What is this dispute? What is the origin and what is the current standoff is something that we'll speak about in this edition of Simply Nitin. I'm Nitin Gokhale. So the history of dispute, as I mentioned, goes back to the 1950s and 60s, when China refused to acknowledge what used to be called the McMahon Line in Arunachal Pradesh, which used to be called NEFA, the Northeast Frontier Agency. And of course, the 62 war that all of us are aware of, in which China comprehensively defeated India in NEFA, now Arunachal Pradesh, and parts of Ladakh, which is where the current dispute is on. Last year, Ladakh was separated from Jammu and Kashmir and now is a union territory. Its capital is Leh, but the standoff is happening at two different points in the area that Ladakh occupies. Ladakh is actually bordering Tibet, which is occupied by China in 1949. So the current dispute or current standoff is happening near what is called the hot springs area and the confluence of the Galwan river and the Shyok river, which leads to the plains of Depsang and Daulat Beg Oldie, which is at the base of the Karakoram Pass, which allows China to cut a road through and go into Pakistan. So if you look at the map itself, the topography is really harsh. It's a high altitude desert. Leh, the capital, is at 10,000 feet and the passes and the plateaus can rise up to about 22 to 23,000 feet. Karakoram Pass is at 18,000 feet. Daulat Beg Oldie, which has a small airstrip, is at about 16,500 feet. In fact, the airstrip is the highest in the world. Now, India started late in building infrastructure to reach these border points. China had started the infrastructure in Tibet, which has a much gentler topography, almost 15 years ago. India started catching up only in the last 5 or 6 years or 10 years ago. Now, last year, a road between Darbuk Shyok, which is the last village, inhabited village in that area, and goes right up to DBO, was completed after 15 years of attempt to bridge the Shyok river, fast flowing and violent Shyok river. This bridge was constructed and the road was made through. Now that has allowed India to deploy an additional brigade, which is nearly 3,000 troops in the area of DBO, Galwan and the Depsang plains, which China does not like, and therefore China has started objecting to any infrastructure work that India does. This time on May 9th and 10th, India started building a feeder road near the Galwan valley where the Galwan and Shyok rivers meet. India started building a small feeder road which was objected to, and the Chinese troops started coming across what is called the line of actual control. Now, why is it called line of actual control? Because the perceptions of where exactly the boundary lies differ on both sides, and therefore patrolling happens on both sides. Indian troops go up to a point which they think is the border that India controls. Chinese troops come to areas where Chinese think they control. Sometimes the face-offs happen. Those are accidental face-offs. There is a mechanism to resolve it. It's called the banner drill. But in this particular case, China actually aggressively came into the Galwan area to try and stop India's road building activity. But even before that, there was another flare-up at the Pangangso Lake. The Pangangso Lake is actually a 135 kilometer long lake, 2/3 of which falls in Tibet, now under China, and 1/3 is in Ladakh. That's where aggressive patrolling by mechanized boats, which are armed, and armed troops board those boats, takes place between India and China. Even there is a face-off that happens occasionally. And there are some areas along the banks of the Pangangso Lake where the patrolling or the patrols come face to face, or sometimes China objects to Indian infrastructure building and the flare-up happens. So far, remember, across the entire India-China boundary, there has been no bullet fired since 1976. There are fisticuffs that happen. There are physical bouts, jousting that happens. People shout at each other. But so far, luckily, there has been no shot fired. This time, India is well within its territory, where it's building roads, building shelters, building infrastructure for its troops to travel easily, which China is objecting to. Now, there are multiple theories why China is doing this. One is, of course, that President Xi Jinping of China is under pressure internally for mishandling the COVID or the Wuhan virus crisis, and therefore he is creating diversions in the minds of the domestic audience by being aggressive in South China Sea and against India in Ladakh and in Sikkim. Now, that's one reason. But the second reason is that every summer, remember these are summer months in Ladakh, every summer the Chinese try and assert themselves in what they think are disputed areas. Now, these disputes have been going on, as I said, for more than 60 years and are not easily soluble. But India and China have several mechanisms to talk to each other. They have flag meetings, they have a senior level discussion between foreign secretaries and equivalent in China, and there is the apex level mechanism where the special representatives on the Indian side, it's the NSA, the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, and on their side it's a state councillor or a senior Communist Party leader who talk to each other. And of course there is the Wuhan and the Chennai informal summit that has happened between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping in the past 3 years. But these disputes are ongoing and they will go on. On Thursday, India responded to the Chinese aggression, both verbally and physically, which was done by China over the past couple of days. Before that, India has said Indian troops know exactly where the boundary lies, despite the tough terrain, as I mentioned, in Ladakh. As you can see on the map, the topography is very tough. The temperatures can go down to minus 40-45 degrees. Troops are at constant vigil in these areas, and India has now decided to be resolute on the border and be reasonable at the diplomatic table. Where will this dispute go this time? Nobody knows. But going by past history, recent history, where even a more serious standoff which happened at the tri-junction of India, Bhutan and China in 2017, a 73-day standoff at Dolam, which is popularly known as Doklam, was resolved finally diplomatically. Perhaps even this time there will be a diplomatic solution found. The two armies or the groups of soldiers who are face to face with each other at Galwan and at the Finger area along the Pangangso Lake will step back. But what is worrying to observers of India-China relationship is China's increasing belligerence on issues which were thought to be well settled. For instance, the Sikkim-China boundary or the India-China boundary in the Sikkim sector is an international boundary, well settled, well accepted by both sides. But even there, in the area called Nakula, the Chinese have been increasingly coming beyond what is a settled boundary and saying that this is our area, and they are creating trouble there. Now, that is something that the Indian policy makers have to be aware of and take steps accordingly. because China is under pressure worldwide because of its mishandling of the COVID-19 or the Wuhan virus crisis, and therefore is showing signs of being an insecure giant which wants to show the world that it has all the power, but nobody is taking it seriously. And therefore, maybe there's a long hot summer ahead on the India-China boundary, which is, as I said, nearly 4,000 kilometers long and has several hotspots which can flare up at any moment. That's something that India needs to watch out for. But for the moment, it's all I wanted to say, because it's a very complex history. It cannot be encapsulated in 10 or 15 minutes. But I just wanted to give you a glimpse of the topography and the parts of dispute that have the potential to flare up between India and China. Until the next time, it's goodbye. But don't forget to send us your feedback, like us on our different social media handles, and of course, keep sending suggestions on what topics should I speak about in the episodes of Simply Nitin in the coming weeks and coming months. Till then, goodbye and good luck.